There was a moment when I realized that American families were paying tens of thousands of dollars more for rooftop solar than families in England, where I grew up, in Australia, in Japan, in Germany. And that's outrageous. Like, we should not stand for that. The incredible advances we've made, bringing down the cost of the actual solar panels, bringing down the cost of batteries, bringing down the cost of all the other hardware. It's one of the great engineering miracles of my lifetime. And American families who are struggling with high utility bills, they should have access to that.
In an era where our goal is to drive as much adoption of clean energy as possible, there are those superheroes who are laying aside the burden of the traditional work life, as it were, having perhaps had success or perhaps seen the opportunity to have a big impact in their career. I recently was introduced to one such individual by a good friend, Andrew Birch, otherwise known as Birchie. And that gentleman is Nick Josefowitz, the founder of Permit Power. I would love to dig into your mission of making it cheap and easy for American families to power their lives with clean electricity. Welcome to Suncast.
Well, I'm so excited to be here. I'm definitely not a superhero, although my kids love those films. Just trying to be useful.
Indeed. Well, can you give us a sense then of the entry point, that spark moment that made it clear for you that there was a path different from the one you had been following that must include the business that is now Permit Power?
I grew up in London, England, and I always sort of had a perspective on how things are done in Europe and elsewhere in the world. And there was a moment when I realized that American families were paying tens of thousands of dollars more for rooftop solar than families in England, where I grew up, in Australia, in Japan, in Germany. And that's outrageous. Like, we should not stand for that.
Yeah.
The incredible advances we've made, bringing down the cost of the actual solar panels, bringing down the cost of batteries, bringing down the cost of all the other hardware. It's one of the great engineering miracles of my lifetime.
Yeah.
And American families who are struggling with high utility bills, they should have access to that. And the reason they don't is for a number of reasons, but a lot of it is because permitting is slow and cumbersome and expensive. Interconnection is slow and cumbersome and expensive. And these are things that we can fix. And so I wanted to go out and fix them.
Did you come from a construction background, in some way have visibility into how to fix these issues?
You know, I started off my career as a C&I developer in Europe.
You did?
So I spent about 8 years doing that. So I have sort of the scars on my back of struggling with permitting and interconnection in places like Italy and elsewhere. And I always thought at the time that you're not going to get a more bureaucratic place than Italy. And that was before I was living in the United States. And
fair.
And so I have the personal experience of doing this at a slightly different scale.
Yeah.
And then for the last 10 years, I've been involved in trying to make it cheaper and easier to build all sorts of building infrastructure on the public policy side. So how do we make it easier to build the housing that we need in our cities? How do we make it easier to build subways? How do we make it easier to build sidewalks, public toilets? I mean, this stuff is also way too expensive in this country. And so about a year and a half ago, I decided to found Permit Power with some other colleagues as a nonprofit, because it was kind of the coming together of the work I'd initially done as a C&I developer in the solar space, the work I'd done trying to make it easier to build infrastructure, and this felt like everything I'd been working up to at this point in my career was coming together, and this was something that I could really contribute to and do something important with.
You've highlighted a truly astounding figure, which is that American families are paying, in many cases, more than $35,000 for rooftop solar, and in Australia, the same system's somewhere around $6,000.
Yeah.
This isn't just a slight difference. This is a massive gap. It's a gulf, you might say. Can you help unpack what key drivers elevate the price in the U.S.?
Yeah. So when you sort of look at the sort of the pricing of of a U.S. rooftop solar system, a lot of it ends up being what I would describe as paperwork rather than panels.
Yeah.
And you always have to find a way to alliterate around these things.
That's right.
And I mean, you're the expert communicator. So the hardware is slightly more expensive in the US. We have tariffs. We're slightly further away from China, that type of thing. But fundamentally, the thing that makes the US so much more expensive is that it takes a really long time to install rooftop solar.
Yeah.
That unlike in other countries, every system has to be slightly different to account for the peculiarities of a local government's permitting regulations, for the way that a different utility works. And all of that just ends up turning what should be fundamentally a consumer product into some sort of bespoke artisanal product.
Right.
And that plays itself out in all sorts of ways. So Tesla just came out with a phenomenal report that really breaks some of this stuff down.
Such a good report.
Such a good report. And
we'll link to the report.
Definitely. Everybody should take a read of it. And they looked at sort of, for instance, some of the direct costs of permitting, which is that you need to have, unlike in other countries, you need to have a whole team of people that keep track of permit requirements.
Yeah.
You need to have a whole team of people that then follow up.
Yeah.
You need to have a customer service team to manage customers between when they buy it and the 4 months later when they get it installed. But then you have all the sort of the secondary costs, which are sort of part of what makes rooftop solar in the US so artisanal. You have
artisanal. I haven't heard anyone refer to it that way.
You know, I mean, you're a very snappy dresser, and folks who are watching this will see that. And it's really like, we want to make rooftop solar in the US look a lot more like buying a suit at off the rack.
Macy's, yeah,
at Macy's or Nordstrom, rather than going to the sort of fancy tailor, in the in like the sort of in the alley of New York, where they're going to make it just perfect for you.
You'll find me in the alley, by the way.
I love it. And that's why it looks like it does.
That's right.
And you know what? If people could buy cheap solar, more people would have the money to afford to be able to go to the snappy tailor.
Yeah.
So
we should start a snappy tailor fund.
Exactly.
I'd call it permit power.
So the cost of customer acquisition is incredibly high in the US. One of the reasons is because salespeople have to wait 4 months to get paid their commission.
Yeah.
And then a lot of people who've bought solar drop out after they've bought it because they're waiting and things happen in their lives. They decide they want to go on holiday to Hawaii.
Do you know the number of attrition? Like, what is it hovering around?
It's hovering around a third. And it depends, different places, different businesses. But that's an enormous amount. And so the cost of acquiring those customers then gets spread around the rest of us.
Yeah.
And so permitting and interconnection and the delays and complications that cause have a knock-on effect on a big knock-on effect on the cost of customer acquisition. And so you can sort of look at the line items, and a lot of them end up sort of coming back to, well, the reason that this is difficult to make much cheaper is because it takes so long, it's so complicated, that everything costs more.
So I understand some of the structural differences in terms of the delays, the uncertainty around families as a result, oftentimes, of the delays, having enough time to decide that it wasn't a good decision. They want to do something else with their money. What about just pure inputs, cost inputs? Where do you see the cost differential here versus elsewhere?
I mean, it's a great question. I'll give you some examples. Because every local government, every utility is sort of given the leeway to come up with their own rules as to what they allow.
Yeah.
You have situations where, for instance, utilities require you to install all sorts of extra protective gear that is completely unnecessary, which just drives up costs.
Mm-hmm.
And each utility will require you to install a slightly different variation of all that gear. And at the same time, they're not letting you use some of the sort of latest technology that can really save installers money, like meter collar adapters, or they're not allowing flexible interconnection using smart inverters that can sort of self-regulate how much power they're exporting to the grid based on how congested the grid is at any moment in time.
Yeah.
And that is just all of that sort of not being able to use the sort of the latest technology and having to sort of install all these unnecessary pieces of kit is all adding cost and complexity. And the same is true for permitting. we just have a situation in San Francisco where I live, for instance, where the fire department was in the process of trying to put in place even more regulations on how batteries were installed, and they were going to be requiring homeowners to rip up their garage, add thicker drywall to their garage, like a quarter of an inch thicker, before they could put a battery in.
Yeah.
Who's going to do that? No one.
And in some places, you got to add bollards. You got to add all kinds of things just to...
Totally. I mean, nowhere else in the world are you having to put in bollards, but the latest version of the code required bollards because every local government was coming up with their own plans on how to keep these batteries safe.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so ironic that people are driving, these massive EVs into their garages. And what we've decided is the risk is that they sort of knock the battery that's on your wall,
right,
rather than drive the battery at 75 miles an hour down the highway.
Yeah.
I mean, we
That's a really good point, actually. Do you know, I was hanging out with folks from Run on Climate, and they're taking the fight to local government. Do you know how many local, technically qualified as local municipal governments we have in the U.S.?
I always say 19,000, but how many do we have?
You got you got 4 of the numbers right. There's a 9 and there are 3 zeros. There's another 0 though.
Oh my God.
90,000.
Yeah, I mean.
90.
Imagine if GE was told that they had to make a slightly different washing machine for every city that they sold washing machines in.
And this is one of the reasons. This is one of the things that takes companies like Sunnova down, for what it's worth. Like, they had a massive customer service team.
Massive. I mean, I remember talking to them, and they were giving me examples that in Illinois, they need to get registered in every single, in Indiana, I think it was, they need to get registered in every single county to do business. They needed to get all their directors fingerprinted.
Amazing.
And that there was no requirement for that county to deliver them even just a simple business license within a reasonable amount of time. So sometimes it would take over a year just to get a business license to operate in that county.
Yeah.
And you have the sort of the knock-on effect, which doesn't show up in anybody's P&L in terms of when you're looking at the sort of the cost of an individual solar system, is that it's very difficult for the best installers.
Yeah. No, we end up rewarding companies that can navigate red tape.
Exactly. And that if you want to start a solar business and what you're really good at is installing solar, and not good enough, you need to be really good at sort of managing sort of all this crap.
You totally caught me off guard.
And no one goes into the solar business because they love paperwork.
Yeah.
I mean, they go into it because they want to put panels on people's roofs. They want to put batteries in people's garages. They want to save people money. And that's incredibly frustrating. And then I think it has this sort of very anti-competitive flavor to it, because if you're really good at your job and you want to expand to the next county over, well, you got to get to know Jimmy at the permitting office, and how does Tina do their inspections?
And we end up paying people to make up for government incompetence. Yeah, which is tragic, but all too prevalent. So, talk about the path out of this quagmire, if you will.
And I think this is what should give us a little bit of hope, because we don't have to wait for sort of Washington, D.C. to swoop in and save us. And if we did, that was never going to happen. The power to really transform permitting and interconnection, get rid of all this red tape, really sits with states. And states are still open for business. They're much more connected, I think, with the concerns of everyday people, of small businesses, than the federal government is. And so you've seen, actually, over the past years, tremendous progress in streamlining permitting for rooftop solar and home battery systems, from states as different as California and New Jersey and Maryland to Texas and Florida.
Yeah.
They've all done it in their own way. So in California, there was a law that was passed that required local governments to offer permits instantly using automated software for rooftop solar and home batteries. And that's gone incredibly well. You now have a situation where in California, you can install a rooftop solar system almost as fast as in Texas. And I challenge any of the listeners to find something else that you can do in California as fast as you can do it in Texas.
Yeah.
And in Texas, there was a law passed actually a few months ago that is just taking effect now, that allows solar installers and actually anybody who's installing backup power of any sort in their for their home, to use a licensed third-party engineer or building inspector to do their permit review and issue their permits and do their inspections instead of the local building department.
Yeah.
So if your building department is slow and cranky and applying all sorts of rules in the wrong way, you can just go with a sort of a third-party licensed engineer. And for a state like Texas, that introduces sort of healthy competition into the provision of government services.
That's great.
And
we're seeing more privatization of government.
And it's really just sort of an alternative that people can have. And what's remarkable? A lot of these local governments are just totally delighted.
Oh yeah,
because they don't want to be spending their time.
It's burdensome. Yeah,
sort of permitting like what are ultimately sort of ticky-tacky home renovation projects. They want to be spending their time as a building department focusing on how they can get the mall redeveloped.
Right.
Or how they can, help a new apartment building get built, or how they can bring a new factory and sort of make sure that is safe for their community. And I think, we see a lot of building departments being like, thank you for coming in and giving us an option to do this thing quicker, because this isn't actually what's most important for our communities.
Yeah.
It's these other things that we should be focusing on, and we're stretched, and this is going to allow us to do that. So it's Brown Climate Solutions Lab put out a report on instant permitting for rooftop solar, and it looked at sort of 7 of the largest states for rooftop solar, and it said that instant permitting would save several thousand hours of government staff time.
Wow.
And so it's not just a win for families and a win for solar installers, it's also a win for governments who shouldn't have better things to do with their time.
Indeed. So you mentioned in the outset that you are an entrepreneur, you'd been a solar developer, but I recall when I first talked to you about the business of Permit Power, you said, I can't build a company that will fix these problems.
Yeah.
Why is Permit Power a nonprofit advocacy organization rather than a for-profit company like the ones that, were permit runners for Vivint back in the day, right? Like why this path? And tell me exactly the value to the marketplace for you as with you as a nonprofit rather than a for-profit.
It's a great question. I think, there's a lot of companies which sort of are takers of broken government processes, and then they try and make them slightly more navigable for industry.
Right.
And that's what a permit runner does. Like we shouldn't need permit runners, but we have them because the government processes are broken and inefficient, and someone needs to come in and sort of try and make them a little bit more tractable for industry.
Right.
I really wanted, and that is important, and I have nothing bad to say about permit runners, but we shouldn't need them. And so what I wanted to do is I wanted to sort of actually reform the underlying processes.
Yeah.
So that we didn't need a sort of a kludge on top of them. That the processes actually worked really well to start with. That we had, like government was offering sort of permits in an automated and instant way. That you didn't have to wait around for utility interconnection and have all sorts of connections with the utilities to get to the front of the queue. That you could you could just do it very seamlessly, and it was super straightforward.
Yeah.
And so I was really motivated at this point in my career to try and sort of fix some of these underlying problems, and then allow industry to kind of innovate on top of that. And it's not none of us are solving any of these problems alone. It takes a village. It takes an enormous amount of teamwork. I can sort of help government sort out its processes. I can help utilities sort out their processes, and then we're ultimately going to need solar installers to also, do things better, do things cheaply, and pass on those cost reductions to customers.
Can you talk about the solution set that you set out to develop with Permit Power? What does it look like for an installer? What are some of the sort of key terminology you use, like flexible interconnection, and how do they benefit the marketplace?
So we want to get rid of all the rules that would prevent an installer from being able to install a system within a few days of selling it. Yeah. So that's kind of like one of the lenses that we use. Yeah. And so like slow permitting and slow interconnection will definitely stop you doing that.
Yeah.
Homeowners associations that make you go through an enormous sort of process, wait until, the December meeting, and then like Joey's on holiday and we don't have quorum, and then you're pushed over, whatever. All that's got to go.
Yeah.
And then we also have to make sure that the rules are applied consistently, and that they're not requiring installers to install kit that's expensive that we don't need, or preventing them from installing kit that's really cheap and that would be really valuable.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the solution set of stuff that we go after. Within that, we talked a lot about permitting. On the interconnection side, we need to take advantage of the technology that exists. We can't be doing interconnection the same way that we did it in the 1970s. So the way we think about it is that to start with, if you're not exporting to the grid, you shouldn't have to go get the approval from the utility.
Right.
You don't need the utility's approval to put in an energy efficient light bulb. You don't need the utility's approval to go to Florida for 3 months and not use any power in your home. You shouldn't need approval of the utility to install solar and batteries and not export. We call that my home, my power.
Yeah.
And that would then provide, I think, a very quick process by which, or sort of an instant process by which installers could install solar and go through and not have to go through that interconnection process. Now, after that system has been installed, you should still be able to sort of apply for an interconnection. And the way we think that should happen is through a flexible interconnection process. A little bit like what's happening in Hawaii. Hawaii has the most congested grid in the country because of all the solar that's been deployed. Yeah. But it also has the fastest and most streamlined interconnection process because they're leveraging smart inverters that can sense how congested the distribution grid is and then can adjust in real time how much power they're exporting. And all of this, almost all new solar systems are deployed with smart inverters. Yeah. But almost all utilities completely ignore them. And so if we could get utilities to recognize the functionality of smart inverters, it would move to a place where it's more like a notification of the utility that you've installed this equipment. They need to check that you've installed the equipment properly and it's been set up properly. But then the equipment can kind of manage the export for you, and you don't need to go through a complicated utility process. That probably needs to be paired with a sort of a regime where the utilities commit to upgrading their distribution grids to be able to handle this capacity so you don't have too much curtailment. But that, I think, is a high-class problem, and we can deal with that when we deal with it. But I think the fundamentals is let's not have to go through this sort of very cumbersome utility interconnection process. Let's take advantage of the technology that's already being deployed, like we're already doing in some states and in many other parts of the world.
Nick, we're at a point in the industry where not only are we maturing in the business models that we need to deploy, but in the way that we need to address our approach as a product to the consumer, our policies and regulatory regime that enable or prevent this type of technology to be readily integrated, as you were just illustrating. I want to play the magic wand game with you, but it's kind of two things. So ordinarily I would say wave a magic wand, and what one thing would you change in the next 1 to 2 years? But I feel like there's two threads to pull. One is like, if you could wave a magic wand, how would you sort of, like a fairy godmother, bless the installers? Like, this is what I'm giving you. And then similarly for the industry, like, what does that look like from a policy or regulatory level? Yeah. If it was just one or maybe two levers that could be pulled, that like almost like there's an invisible hand that goes, oh, it's right here. You just didn't know you could pull it.
Yeah. I'm going to start at a high level.
Okay.
I think that for a long time, a lot of people outside of the rooftop solar industry have thought about rooftop solar as a little bit of a toy in the context of the clean energy transition. Small projects, super expensive, don't really have a big role here compared to, 1.5 gigawatts in the Texas desert, a 5 gigawatt offshore wind farm, whatever it is. And I think that was kind of true for really expensive rooftop solar. For really cheap rooftop solar, I think it has an enormous role to play in the clean energy transition, especially at this moment when affordability is absolutely paramount for everybody. Yeah. Because rooftop solar, both on someone's home and on someone's business, is basically one of the only things that we can do to save people an enormous amount of money on their utility bills immediately, on their next utility bill.
And into perpetuity.
And into perpetuity. And I think that as we see sort of the federal government pulling back from an era of where sort of the clean energy transition was going to be driven by sort of large subsidies and large sort of amounts of government support on the renewable side and on the sort of vehicle electrification and building electrification side. Yeah. Cheap rooftop solar can provide some of the cheapest power not just to save people money, but also to completely transform the sort of the value of the economics of vehicle electrification, the economics of home electrification. With cheap solar on your roof, you can power your car at the equivalent of like 30 cents a gallon.
Yeah.
Right? That is like transformative. Wild. That is wild. And I think we need to sort of recognize the role that we can play in improving people's lives and in solving and in sort of providing an enormous sort of driver of the clean energy transition and the sort of vehicle and building electrification. And we need to sort of start thinking a little bit bigger as to what we can offer to society.
Yeah.
And I think this is the moment to do it, because, all those people that were super excited about offshore wind, and I was one of them. I mean, it's not happening for a while in this country.
Few years off.
And utility scale, it turns out that utility scale projects are much more vulnerable to sort of federal meddling.
Yeah.
Than sort of, just individual homeowners.
Very interesting.
Throwing up a few panels on their roof. And I think we need to sort of step up to this challenge. We need to be able to deliver really low cost solutions to way more people than we've been doing it in the past. And that's what I'm excited about being able to kind of help bring about.
Yeah. So one last time as we wrap up here, help folks understand exactly, I'm an installer or developer, why do I care about permit power? And then now that I care about permit power, how do I engage?
If you've ever struggled with a permit, if you've ever struggled with an inspection, if you've ever sort of had to apply for an interconnection and just been like, yanked around by your utility and it hasn't come fast enough and your customers are complaining, we're on the same page. We feel your pain and we're out to try and solve those problems. Now, we're a nonprofit. We are not funded by industry, but we work very closely with the installers who are struggling most with these problems. And we work really closely with the state solar associations. Yeah. So if you're an installer and you're feeling this pain, reach out, nick@permitpower.org. We're going to find a way maybe for you to tell your story in a newspaper. Or we're going to find a way for you to go talk to your state solar association to make these issues a priority. We're going to maybe even get you to call your state senator or your state assembly member or your mayor. We're going to do all the work to kind of figure out what is the best use of your time and your resources to be able to help solve some of these problems together with us and with a whole bunch of other partners. And we'll be able to achieve something, I think, really, really meaningful, not just for the solar industry, but for American families and American businesses who are struggling with high utility bills and are just looking to be given an option for them to be able to take control of their electricity future.
Nick Josefowitz is the founder of Permit Power, and we are broadcasting live from the Power Up Live Pro Studio presented by TerraHive here at RE Plus 2025. Nick, thank you for taking time to join us in the studio.
Nico, thank you so much for inviting me. We should always coordinate on our jackets.
Looking good. You're just missing your dinner pin.
Oh no!
Your Power Circle pin.
Disaster.
Yeah, I like the light blue and white though. It's working for you.
Thank you.
Nick, thanks for coming. Appreciate it.
Bye.